continuing the history portion of the conference. This worked out well. And yeah, it's a little bit of a different kind of topic, but Matt can't say no to something about Xsan. So. My name is Eric Hemmeter. I work for RSK Group. We're a small consulting company focused on media production, storage, and workflows. Started with computers with an Apple IIe, helping my mom do AppleWorks databases. So. Apple certified trainer and Xsan 2 administrator. Yeah, we design, configure, manage Xsan for lots of different groups. Our main focus is small groups within larger companies that need to do media production. So their IT staff doesn't want to deal with it. Obviously, if the company's job is media production, then they're probably dealing with it themselves. And then along with that goes, how do we automate some of the workflow stuff that needs to happen for media production? How do we get things to be consistent? So I'll talk a little bit about some of those tools that we've created towards the end there as well. I assume that most people have a passing familiarity with cloud storage and NAS devices, so we'll just touch on those briefly, and then we'll get a little bit into what is a SAN, how does Xsan work, what do we need to do it, why would we want to do this? So cloud storage, this is a lot of hard drives in somebody else's data center. We pay money, we can keep putting more and more stuff in there, potentially unlimited as long as you have enough money. Hopefully we have redundant copies of that. Make sure to read your agreements with your storage providers. So, hopefully they have multiple data centers and your data isn't just sitting on one drive in one data center. Lots of options there. I'm sure everybody's got their favorite. Yeah. They all work very similarly, maybe syncing, maybe just upload, download, egress, ingress costs, that kind of thing. Some things to consider there. How do we handle conflicted copies? If we have multiple people trying to work on something and I sync my version and they sync their version, and now, well, which one is real? And then also, do they talk to our directory services or our identity provider? How do we handle permissions and who can access those kinds of things? NAS, of course, is our network attached storage. Generally, this is a box that you put in a rack somewhere or sits on a desk somewhere, also full of hard drives. Access the storage over SMB, maybe NFS, maybe FTP still. These have come a long way in the past 5-10 years. It used to be very, maybe you could get 1 gigabit connection and there was one controller and what you bought was what you got, and maybe you could swap the drives, but that was a pain because where do you put all the data while you're doing that swap? They're much more flexible these days. We can get up to 100 gig Ethernet. We can have expandable chassis. We just keep, we can add a couple more sets of hard drives. Maybe we get multiple controllers. Maybe we can have multiple network interfaces, so we've got some failover. They've come a long way. There are still definitely some limitations there. And then, Greg was picking on Adobe a little bit earlier, so I was also going to, I think they've gotten better. But for a long time, that was unsupported. You couldn't work on Photoshop or Illustrator files over network connection, on an SMB share. I think it's gotten better, but you just want to be aware of those kinds of things. So that brings us to SAN. This is a storage area network. This network is a fiber channel network. This gives us a lot of flexibility in that we can just keep putting more storage on that fiber network. If we need to expand, there is a limit. You can only have 512 LUNs, and a LUN is basically just a RAID. So we have some number of drives in a RAID 5 or a RAID 6. That's a LUN. Depending on what device you're using to hold that storage, you can have, a 10 drive LUN, and maybe those are 20 terabyte hard drives. Like, this can get really big pretty easily. Connection speeds, 16 and 32 gigabit fiber channel are pretty standard at this point. You can definitely get 64 gigabit fiber channel. Looks like they're supposed to be ratifying 128 gig fiber channel this year. But keep in mind your Thunderbolt limits. We'll talk about how we get our Macs onto this fiber channel network, but if we're using a Thunderbolt adapter, we are going to be limited by that 40 gigabit connection for now. Nicely, an Xsan is a local volume to our Macs. So we don't have any of those network connection issues. We don't see that there's some file level locking that happens, so we don't get into situations of conflicted copies and who's modifying and can I edit that file at the same time or not. Talk a little bit more about the metadata journal, but this is a clustered file system, so it's not just like a regular hard drive where there's some information about the data and then all the data is just right there next to it. We'll see that we can separate that out, and that gives us some more speed benefits. So really, this is ideal for video production, definitely. But any big data where you need fast, low latency access to it. So who has used an Xsan? Okay, good. Anybody still using Xsan? All right, me and Matt. Oh, I got to see one other. Excellent. This, I believe, was the Apple booth at NAB 2007. Xserve RAID. It was the solution to everything at the time. So obviously, that's not how we build Xsans anymore, but we'll see what we do there. So a little history. There's a company called Mountain Gate. I think they released this in 1997. That was the first instance I could find. There was an NAB flyer about releasing CentraVision by Mountain Gate, the clustered file system. And we'll see a lot of our commands are CV something, CentraVision. They were purchased by Advanced Digital Information Corporation. They renamed the product to StoreNext. We'll see we have a lot of command line tools that are SN, whatever, StoreNext. Apple licensed this in 2004 and released Xsan 1 in 2005 for macOS Panther. This was a $1,000 per seat license at the time. It came on a CD with the little code on the back. You needed one for each server you were connecting, one for each client you were connecting. And then shortly after, Quantum bought StoreNext from Apple. Luckily for us, somehow the licensing kept working. Apple has continued to support Xsan ever since. Starting with macOS 10 Lion, they started making Xsan free. The client is built into macOS 10. And the server tools moved into server app. So it went from $1,000 a seat to, well, if you want the app, the server app, it was $50 on the App Store. The client was free. And then sadly, 2021, they removed server app. So at this point, Xsan is all command line. It's not too bad. If we want to run an Xsan, primarily we need block storage. That's our main thing. These are our boxes in our data center, RAIDs. We'll talk about how we might want to set them up a little bit. We need fiber channel switching and networking. This is probably the biggest sticking point. If anybody is looking to get into Xsan, this is your expensive part, your fiber switch, and cabling to whatever clients you might want. We do need DNS, so hopefully we've got that on our public network anyway. Obviously, we need our Macs. We'll have two that are MDCs, our metadata controllers. This is what runs the whole thing. You could get away with one, but you want to. We need a way to connect our Macs to this fiber channel network. Atto, Promise, they don't actually make them. Promise doesn't make the fiber channel ones anymore, but you can still find them. Thunderbolt 3, great. If you do have Mac Pros, you can get Atto PCI cards. They work great. If you want to get that 64 gigabit connection, keep buying those Mac Pros. We do need a separate network for the metadata. We'll see how this comes in here in a minute. But any dumb switch is great. You basically want as little running on that metadata network as possible. So doesn't need to be anything special. And then, not required, of course, but we definitely recommend some way to archive, some way to have extra copies of things. So this is a sample Xsan, just, removed all the names from something that we put together for a customer. We have our Macs here that run it. We need DNS. We use DNS mask to run DNS. It's fine for this use case. We have our 2 metadata controllers. And then one of the benefits of Xsan, we can have as many file servers as we want to. If we have multiple groups within a company that are sharing the SAN, we could have, production or video versus photo. They could each have their own file server. It's all pointed to the same file system. It looks the same from either direction, but they feel special. They have their own file server. We have our MDO1 RAID, metadata RAID. Again, we separate out the metadata that tells the file system, okay, this file starts here and has other extents here and here and here. The second file starts here and goes to there, and that's our metadata section. And we also have a journal that keeps track of all the changes to the file system. And all this information is shared to our clients over that metadata network, the private green there metadata network. So when a client goes to say, hey, what's in that folder? Talks to the MDCs. MDCs look in the metadata RAID, provides that information, says, here's all the files in that folder. The user goes and double clicks one, goes back to that metadata connection and finds out where the rest of that file is on the big block part. RAID Prado 1, Prado 2, again, potentially, hundreds. Probably not, but potentially. In this instance, this was a 257 terabyte production volume, and then a 1.66 petabyte backup volume. We'll talk about why we might want so much backup storage. But again, we had same thing. We'll share the DNS, but we have 2 MDCs. And then in this case, we have our P5. We'll talk about ArcAware. P5 is what we recommend for data movement and backup and archive. And then our tape system down there at the end for that archiving purpose. So we have all these pieces. We want to get things set up. Again, we need DNS. Doesn't matter where it comes from. We just need names. Got a question?
So all the end user workstations need 2 different connections, one to the internet and one to the metadata network.
So the question is, do all of the client systems need 2 Ethernet connections, one for the private and one for the public? I mean, if you want to give them internet access, yes. They really need the one metadata network. But yeah, maybe they use Wi-Fi for their internet access, but yes, they do need an extra network connection for the metadata. And a fiber connection to the storage area network. Yep.
You can mix it, but don't ask me how I know.
Well, okay. Matt is right. It can all run over one network, but don't do that. All right, so we get our DNS from somewhere. Doesn't matter where. Maybe it's your Active Directory. That would work. Maybe it's a Mac running DNS mask. That works too. Maybe it's your router, whatever network device you have. We set up our RAIDs. Depends who you bought your RAID from, how exactly that works, but we have to break it up into LUNs. We want our metadata and our journal LUNs to be mirrors. We want our data drives, our data LUNs to be RAIDs 5 or RAID 6. Whatever you're comfortable with there, if you want spares or not. You can set all of that up within that RAID interface. Then we have to label the LUNs. And this is where we start getting into some of these CV and SN and Xsan CTL commands. This is just giving the LUN a useful name, sort of so that you know what it's for, but so that you can tell the volume. Use this LUN for that and use this other LUN for that. We'll see that here in a minute. This is probably the most fiddly of the command line things. The thing I miss most about server app is labeling the LUNs. I'm not going to read all of these to you and explain them all. We do have a blog, rskgroup.org/blog, where I've gone through setting up an Xsan. I think that was for Monterey, but it actually hasn't changed much since then. So we use Xsan CTL. This is an Apple command to actually create the SAN. It turns on the SAN services. We add our backup metadata controller. Again, you always want to. They take turns sort of as needed hosting the volume. If one of them goes offline, the other one is right there, picks it right up, keeps running. And then now we can add our volume. And so this one I will take a little bit of time here. First step, first part there, that test Xsan, that's the name that the end users will see on their clients. So we want to make this descriptive, useful, appropriate, etc. Then we have a nice big choice here. By default, if we don't do anything, you're going to end up using POSIX permissions. You don't want to end up there. It uses the UID of all the local, every client, whatever UID the user happens to have there, ends up being the one that applies. So if you have a lot of 501 users, they all get the same access. Not good. Generally, we recommend enabling ACLs. We tie this into a directory service. We set up groups. We can be very explicit about who gets access to which files. The other way to go, the second most common option for an Xsan is that you can do ignore owners. And now it's like a big external FireWire drive. Matt likes this option. Ignore owners, everybody has full access to everything on there. That works too. If that is how if that works for that group, then great. Just, you don't want to end up in that POSIX situation because things are weird. Then we have to start telling the volume how it's built. So we're adding a storage pool. We don't need to get into details. Hit me up on Slack or whatever if you want to talk about how to set up your storage pools. But we have to create a metadata storage pool. We need a journal storage pool. Those can be the same one. We tend to recommend keeping them separate just for performance reasons. But also now that you can buy all flash RAIDs at this point, so that's less of a concern as well. Metadata storage pool, journal storage pool, and then we create data storage pools, depending on how we want to break things up. And you can play some games here with, if you have more LUNs per storage pool, the storage is faster because a client is always writing to one storage pool at a time. So if you have more drives in that storage pool, it can be spanned over multiple drives, it's faster. If you have more storage pools, then you get more uncontested access because each file, each client is only ever working on one at a time. So there are things you can do there to fine tune. And then we add clients. So the way that this works is through a profile. I didn't look up when this started, a couple of versions of the OS ago. We can export this profile with our xsanctl command. You can push it out with your MDM. You can go drag it to, put it on a computer and double click it and go to system settings and say install. Interestingly, what happens with this profile? The profile tells the client where the MDCs are. Well, sorry, let me back up. It tells the client where the open directory that hosts this information is. So one of the things that comes along with Xsan, when you create your SAN, test SAN, you create an open directory master. Who still runs open directory? Our two Xsan people still run open directory. So this is an interesting side effect sort of running an Xsan, is that you get an open directory master for free, whether you want it or not. So the profile says, hey client, go talk to the open directory. Open directory has a container. Well, actually it's in the groups container, there's an Xsan group, and then there's a whole big plist inside one of those group entries, records. And that's where all the data actually comes from. That's the official way it works. If you really don't like Open Directory, you can get away without it, but hit me up on Slack. All right, so then we've got our Xsan, we've got our production volume, we've got our nearline volume, we've got our archive, we've got clients connected. How are we going to deal with all this data? So a user ingests a file, they start a project, they edit things. We want to make sure that we have multiple copies of this. Xsan is very resilient, it's very redundant, but still, we want to make sure we have lots of options if we ever needed to restore something. So we recommend, we tend to use, again, ArchiWare's P5 product, the sync and the archive options. So every 30 minutes, ArcAware is talking to FS events on the metadata controllers and saying, hey, what's changed? Copies all that over. We just always have a current, within the past 30 minutes version of what's happening. Then every night, we do a mirror or a snapshot. We'll go through all the whole volume, everything that we care about, make a copy over there. We're going to keep those probably for 30 days, and then they start falling off. But this is why we want our backup volumes appropriately sized for the amount of data on our production volumes, because we want to keep a lot of copies of that. Client comes to us and says, oh, hey, we decided to reverse course. We need the version of that from a week ago. We can get that for you. No problem. At some point, hopefully they finish projects. At that point, we make the version on the production volume read-only. We take a new copy, the final version, and then we're going to write that off to our archives. We write it to 2 tapes. We've recently, in the past couple of years now, we've also been starting to push stuff to cloud. Then at some point, they keep generating content, those users, more and more. So we need to clean up our production volume. We don't want to let it get too full. You do run into fragmentation issues when you get around 80%-ish of your volume full. It's not a hard limit, but you want to start paying attention then. So we remove it from production. We've now got our copies, our 3 copies, 4 copies with 2 tapes in the archive. Potentially at some point, we might also need to remove it from Nearline. That can fill up too. We can always add more storage. We've had customers do that. Hey, yeah, this is starting to fill up, but we're not ready to delete anything. Can we just add? Yeah, just buy more RAIDs. It's actually really easy, as long as they have the money. So now maybe later on we need to restore stuff. Beautiful part about having the cloud storage archive, users are very familiar with this. They know Box. They can go to Box, go through the archive and say, oh yeah, this is the raw file we want, or here's the final version that we're going to re-edit and bring into the new project. We can grab it from the cloud, a file at a time. That's great. If something happens and we need to restore terabytes, we don't want to wait for the cloud. That's internet speeds. At that point, then we can pull from our tape, local in the data center, get back the big storage. So a couple options. Again, we recommend ArcAware P5. It has been great for this kind of thing. You can certainly create your own scripts. Recommend taking a look at rsync certainly, but CVCP sync. Got a little bit more about that here in a minute. This isn't going to get you writing to tape. There might be some other tools for doing that manually. Writing to cloud, I know there are some free tools out there for pushing stuff up to different cloud providers. You could script it yourself if you want. Again, we like ArcAware. The next step, Xsan is licensed StoreNext. You can go to Quantum and say, hey, I want MDCs, and they will sell you very expensive boxes to run as your MDCs. It does come with this policy engine, which is very powerful. You can set up all sorts of thresholds about when things get duplicated, how often they get duplicated, how many copies you keep. It was originally very focused on let's get everything to tape as fast as possible. Makes some sense. They also sell tape machines and tapes. They'd love you to buy, a 100 tape library with the robot and all that, but very powerful system. Now it can also go to other StoreNext volumes, other drives, and to cloud storage options. So it's not solely focused on tape at this point. But yeah, that's an expensive option. All right, so a little bit more in the spirit of the conference. Some of the tools that we've put together or want to mention. We've got a little script up on our GitHub called project to HTML. When we write something to the archive, we remove it from the production volume, we put it up, it's only in the archive now. We replace the project with a HTML file, which is just a nice tree of everything that was in there. Sometimes we also will have like an info.txt file with just a description of what was in the project. But this way, if the user is used to going through the file system and they say, oh yeah, I remember this was 2 years ago, I think it was called this, they go to that place in the file system, they'll find this HTML file and they can go through and, oh yeah, that file was here. Let me go submit a ticket to get it back from tape, or let me go to Box and get it from the cloud, or what have you. Since we have all these Macs and data centers in various places, we also have built our own dashboard system. After several different options and lots of shell scripts, and we finally moved to Prometheus, so we're dumping all of our data into Prometheus, and then we still have a custom dashboard off of that. But one of the things that we like to track was temperature in these data centers. We've had issues in the past where, hey, look, the air conditioning turned off, and you don't find out until it's too late. We wanted to know about it. There are tools out there for getting temperatures from your Macs into Prometheus, but none of them were very reliable for us. We had to keep kickstarting launch daemons, and it got really annoying. So we wrote our own SMC exporter. If anybody else is using Prometheus, this is a Swift tool to just export any of that SMC data. Relying on the excellent work, I don't actually know how you pronounce it, Xsan makes the free stats app on GitHub. That's where I got all the SMC data from, but it runs a tiny little web server so that Prometheus can go and get fan speed or temperature or any of that stuff. We've also just recently put something up on the Mac App Store. It was my first App Store app called Cloud Cleanup. This started as a shell script. My boss is trying to upload a bunch of files to Box, and it kept failing because it turns out that our users would like to put emoji in file names, and Box didn't support that. So that's what started this, but it will fix file names based on, you can give it a set of characters that you don't want, and it'll replace them with underscores. It will delete, you can specify like, hey, I don't need the render files to be backed up. Let's delete that folder. Talked about bundles. Now, sorry, I forget who we were just recently talking about bundle files. Packages, bundle packages, that was it. It's actually a folder. If you upload a bundle to some of these cloud services and then later on you bring it back down, sometimes it loses that bundle bit and forgets that it's a file. So we'll zip that up before it gets uploaded, that kind of stuff. And then I do want to, again, call out CVCP Sync by Jasper Seegers. He talked about it a little bit here in 2019, I believe. Great little script. It parallelizes the CVCP command, which is the center vision copy for talking to and from Xsan volumes, incredibly fast. Then you run 10 of them at a time, even faster, and then runs rsync afterwards. It uses rsync to get the list of files, and then also runs rsync afterwards to make sure that like permissions and all that stuff get copied over properly. We do have an updated version to use rsync 3 and some of the checksum features that has. So just that's been great. And I was rewatching his presentation not too long ago, and he was calling out how CVCP Sync had at least one active user in MadX. Well, in case he's watching, he's got 2 at least. So. All right, so Xsan, it's a great choice for video production. That's what it was always designed for. Any other media production, big data kind of thing, it's very flexible, very expandable. There is, of course, you got to buy that fiber switch. You got to have those 2 networks. It can be expensive to get going. And with the trajectory of it, it's still there. I checked last week. It's going to be there in Sequoia. But as Apple was slowly removing support for it, hopefully it's not going away anytime soon. But there is a small but mighty community of us on Mac Admin Slack, the hashtag Xsan. And yeah, our blog, try to write up anything I learn. There's been some challenges doing OS upgrades to your Xsan. I've got some information about that. Some interesting things happen to your Open Directory when you do these upgrades sometimes. Got some information about that.